everyone, and welcome to the foundational episode of the Executive AI Playbook. We will be looking at should we be doing AI or is AI doing us? And also how to know if your company is ready. We landed on this topic essentially because we know that there's been a shift. I've been working in digital transformation since 2014 and supported businesses with implementing AI and automation since 2021. I did a TED talk in 2015 about preparing a generation to take their place in the digital revolution, which was all about how AI and automation will change the workforce and our socio-economic systems dramatically, and the difference in mindset that it takes to participate in this digital world. My co-founder, Jonscott, who I'll get to introduce himself very shortly, has been cultivating leadership talent for Fortune 500 companies for over 25 years, and we've known each other since the pandemic. At the beginning of this year, Jonscott and I were talking, and I said, you know what, it's happened. It's finally happened. We've hit that point on the change curve where organizations are beginning to accept that AI and automation is inevitable, and they will need to implement it. And I know that this is the case because I'm getting an influx of inquiries about leadership requests for AI training and workshops. Because we've known that this is going to happen for such a long time, and this is a defining shift on par with the Industrial Revolution, the world is going to transform in a very short space of time, and leaders are going to need to guide their organizations through AI disruption with people-first leadership. And we're here, and we set up this stream in order to be able to help you to do that. So in this episode, we're going to offer some pragmatic frameworks and questions for assessing some of that AI readiness and really getting to think about the beginning of that journey. It's targeted towards executives who are navigating the complexities of AI adoption. And this session aims to move beyond the hype to actionable insights for integrating AI into business strategies. If you'd like to add your comments, we can see them. We are going to have time at the end of the session where if you've got any thoughts, anything you'd like to be able to add, we will be able to bring them up and have those answers. So Jonscott, lovely to have you with us today. Is there anything you want to be able to add to that introduction? And do you want to give us a bit of perspective on how to assess if a company is AI ready?
Sure. Thanks, Jamie. So it's interesting. So I've been working in consulting to Fortune 500 companies for a number of years. I've stopped quoting the numbers because it's just a lot now. And what I found over the last less than 10 years, so not quite as far back as your TED Talk, is that the change in technology is something that is slow to be embraced at the senior most levels. Typically, it's because, and I can say this a bit more authoritatively now, most of the leaders are my age or older. So, and the pace of change that they're willing to accept and the risk appetite, and this is really a pivotal inflection point that took place during the pandemic. I think the leadership risk appetite, as my insurance company clients like to say, the risk appetite has really plummeted. So people are very unsure. There's a lot of speculation. However, as you said, we have hit a tipping point where I think it's impossible to ignore. More and more of my senior most clients who are leading organizations and enterprise around the world are now looking at how they can harness the power of this and maybe get an AI, that guy knows AI. And it became that into an understanding of there's so much we don't understand. And luckily, many more leaders at the executive level know what they don't know and are trying to figure it out. And I think that's the crossroads that led us to begin this particular enterprise. So understanding that they don't know everything is a big step forward for many leaders, especially at the executive and C-suite and board levels. Understanding that they need to pursue this knowledge because it's going to be transformative is an important place that we find ourselves now. So in terms of understanding if your company is AI ready, there's a host of factors. And I should say this to the people listening and watching this on replay. This is not going to be a deep dive, obviously. It's going to be an understanding and an introduction so that we can help you understand if your company should pursue this, answer some questions that you may have. And again, the chat is open if you have anything. So understanding the data infrastructure is critical because understanding that this is not just a capturing of information. This is a flow in all directions. So understanding the agility that your systems are set up with or that presently contain is a real critical piece. Understanding this because at the first and last, we have to have executive buy-in. So understanding at the senior most levels, is there a sense that this is important? Because as we know, and those of you that are listening, what's said in a town hall meeting or what's said at the water cooler is not necessarily what's said behind closed doors at the board level. So at the board level, at the senior most levels, is there executive buy-in? Is there understanding? And if not, why not? Because this is seriously going to be impacting every one of the businesses, to the people listening to this on this webcast right now. So look and see where the integration points can be. It's not something that I expect organizations to launch into a wholesale, digital transformation from 0 to 100 miles an hour in 1 or 2 months. What are the points that can be addressed? And I'll go back to this as the final point on this. Typically, the understanding of this takes experimentation and failure and curiosity. And that's really the biggest piece. So if you're curious and you have executive buy-in and you have a system architecture that can support new technologies and understanding what the accessibility and the sharing of data looks like, then this could be something that's worthwhile for you.
Love it. Yes, there's so many different aspects there, that leadership journey that I think are really important, and people really understanding why AI has this kind of flashpoint to it as well. And I think the biggest change, it's an author called Yuval Noah Harari who sums it very excellently in their book Nexus, which is, of all the technologies that we've ever had, this is the only one who can actively make decisions. And what we mean by make decisions is that might have had a hammer, you might have had a bomb. It doesn't matter what it was in the past. There was a human being who actively utilized that tool. This is a tool that makes things happen without you having to have that oversight. Well, without you having to direct it per se to be able to do so. It can do so autonomously. And that has obviously a lot of risks attached to it, but it also changes the whole of the way that we've worked. If we're thinking about our industrial world to our digital world, being able to go from that industrial mindset where it was about human labor, it was about getting the person to be able to do that and getting the specialist knowledge from that individual to be able to go and participate in the workforce, versus where we are now, where we go, actually that specialism, that deep knowledge of that person being able to retain, recite, regurgitate information, that's not as important, because AI can do that for a fraction of the price, available on demand, any device, anywhere. And we are literally talking for ChatGPT 4.1. If you're using it as part of something you are building, you are talking 1 million tokens, which is the size of a novel in responses for less than 40 pence. And that becomes a complete game changer for the way that we work. So I suppose to kind of follow on a little bit more is, how do you mobilize leadership to drive that AI change? What are your thoughts around that?
I think it goes into the buy-in, right? So I think if you go back to that, if you have that 1 or 2 persons in the organization that really looks at the technology and the influence it can have on how this is a critical point. It's not just a tool to help, craft a speech or something. This is a fundamental shift in governance, operations, and enterprise structure around the world. It's critical to understand this because those who do will be exponentially far ahead in no time. And that's what we're facing right now, is that the lag and the curiosity and the early adopters, let's just say, are going to lead so far, so fast that catching up is going to be impossible. So it is a bit of an urgency that we face right now. I think understanding the link between artificial intelligence and the company's mission, and most importantly, the values of the organization, because I think people tend to put up their hands really quickly when it comes to, like, I don't want to replace my whole organization. I'm not trying to cut workforce by 50% in the next 2 years. I think that's been the worry. And whenever I've heard that from leaders, I always laugh and I always say, you know who I really feel badly for? I feel really badly for those people who made, horseshoes and saddles, because, Hermes had to, pivot into luxury goods because, their saddle business went out the window when the car came around. So, these are just, we're in the, fourth-ish industrial revolution right now. So these moves are happening right now. And I think also trying to meet the leaders like where they are. Like, we're not trying to come in and blow up, the way operations are run, legacy relationships, legacy ways of working. These aren't going to shift overnight, but the road to these shifts has to begin soon. So I think that's an important piece. And I guess, it leads me to a question for you, which is, how do you introduce AI to leaders who are totally unfamiliar with it? Just, they've heard it, maybe their kids or grandkids or someone they know, or they saw a news report. How do you introduce it to leaders unfamiliar with it?
Yeah, I would say one of the important aspects of this is trying to understand it not just as a technology, but as a fundamental shift in the way that things work, and and that will change the way that the workforce operates. So if I'm going to use two examples of three, which sounds a bit weird, but essentially when I go into businesses and they go to me, we want to do AI, and I'm going, great, what do you want to do with AI? And they go, what is AI? And I go to them, okay, let's boil this into three questions. Is it repetitive? Does it involve a lot of text? Could you teach an intern to do it? And if the answer is yes to any of those questions, then it's likely that that is something that is primed for an AI to be able to do. The other way to be able to look at this that I think is often neglected by people who are thinking about AI and how to implement it within the workforce is essentially looms, slide rules, and cranes. And what I mean by that is a loom is what we kind of do at the moment. When people talk about AI, we go, there's a human being doing that at the moment. Could I get an AI to be able to do it? And it's a little bit unimaginative of way of thinking about it, because we can go, well, Jenny from reception is currently taking these calls. Could an AI go and take those calls? And probably yes, that's possible. And that's, low hanging fruit for a lot of AI that's there. And particularly as our AI capabilities continue to expand, we're going to see its capability to do more and more things, expand as well. However, there is two other sections there which are really important. So slide rules are like, how do we augment human capability? What can we do in our workplace where AI allows what people do really well and allows them to do it faster, quicker, bigger, really kind of tying into the human capability and human potential and magnifying it. And we don't have that conversation enough. We don't talk about how AI can augment human capability. And then the third one is cranes. And this is the conversation that nobody has, which is, what can we get AI to do that is beyond the capability of human capability? So what are the things that we can implement here that we wouldn't hire a person for, that we don't need to augment a human capability to do, but we would have never imagined doing it if it wasn't for an AI being capable to do it? And that, for me, that's the golden ticket with in any organization, because that's where it gives you real measurable benefits and also enhances your workflow. So I think for me, that's where I would introduce it from. And I suppose it kind of leads on to my question to you, which is like, how do you think leaders should champion AI from day one? How do they achieve those measurable results?
I think you just touched on it exactly, which is it's amplification and augmentation, not replacement. So, and I think to dream about ways things can be done optimally in ways that really far escape most senior leadership, board and C-suite executives right now. And not because they're not capable of it, but because, to be completely candid, for those of you watching that are in, let's just say, my age group, we've come from no internet, no mobile phones, the introduction of both, the proliferation of smartphones, the ubiquitous nature of data right now, and it just keeps changing and changing. And the things that we've seen in our lifetime, from literally vinyl records to cassettes to CDs to MP3s to now fully digital platforms, this evolution is so fast that we just feel, and I've heard this from leaders I work with, that this is just another thing, right? It's just another inflection point. And I think having people understand that, yes, we need to make sure that this is understood to be augmenting and not replacing, and amplifying, to Jamie's point, and not replacing. Yet it also is transformative in a way that none of these technologies was previously. It's like, if you can imagine going from a vinyl record to the millions of songs that you have at your hand, in a snap. That transition would never be from vinyl to your smartphone. So what we're facing now is this quantum leap in possibilities. And to Jamie's point, understanding and asking the questions. And this is what we're doing with the Executive AI Institute. We're helping organizations ask those questions about optimal transformations, optimal ways of doing things. So there is this aspect of, well, what if you took off every limiter you can possibly imagine to getting this thing done, or to amplifying this aspect of your business? What would that look like for you if the constraints were totally removed? So it's like going from a steam train on rails to a maglev train where the friction is non-existent, and now it's just running on technology. So I think understanding that, I also think it's really critical to understand the fear I hear is replacing people and replacing human aspects. And I think, and we've written about this, I know both of us have on LinkedIn as well, which is this is not a replacement. This is actually forcing humans to be more human. It's forcing us to really think about, what are the human aspects of this that we want to retain? What are the human aspects of this that we want to amplify? So I think making sure that we do that. And also, in terms of, let's be practical, leaders have to champion a budget for this. I think like anything else, an exploration as to what this can impact, looking at phased out roll-ins. This is not something that you're going to push a switch. It's going to blow everything up. Even our most advanced offer that we have right now is a year-long process at least, which is really a deep dive into organizational efficiencies and opportunities. So I think that that's really the key, understanding that the human aspect of this is amplified. If you're doing this right, and this kind of goes to the title of this, right? Should we be doing AI or is it doing us? If we are doing AI properly, such a bizarre nomenclature, right? But if you're doing AI, you're understanding that your responsibilities as a leader, as a human being, are much greater. You're not abdicating this to the technology. You have to be more human. And I think that there's great opportunity in that as well. Frankly speaking, as someone who's worked with leadership behavior as long as I have, I think it really brings the human back into the business decision making and really gets the leaders it gives them the mirror to look at how they're behaving and how they're leading in a much more tangible way, I believe.
There's a bit that I really love from that, and it reminds me of it's a slide that's going around at the moment, but it's from an IBM 1979, 1989, one of the two, but pre-internet era of what we're looking at. And it says a computer can never be held accountable, therefore a computer should never make a management decision. And I think that that's one of the big conversations we're having at the moment is just because AI can make a decision, just because it could do something, doesn't mean that it can be held accountable at the end of it. And that's the leadership decision bit. That's where we come in as that aspect of, yes, we can do things really quickly, but who has oversight? If we have an AI that's posted into our social media and it makes a mistake or it does something that doesn't align with our brand, who at the end of the day takes accountability for that? There's always going to be a person. You can't just go and blame it on the AI. And I think that's a lot of what we're trying to do with our leadership workshops and training is to look at the accountability, to give people enough understanding around the technology to be able to go, where do we need to step in? Where is leadership needed? Where do I need to teach my staff, upskill my staff on how to be able to leverage this? And I also really love your point around the human-centric aspects. And for me, this is what the revolution is all about, right? Because it is a real chance to redefine what it means to be human in a digital age. And when I think of what a workplace is and the roles that lots of people do, a lot of stuff is menial to people, and I want to be able to utilize AI to shift that menial to the meaningful. And I think one of the most important aspects of that skill cultivation in the digital age are all human-centric skills, because the most valuable things to your business in the next 10, 15 years, or it probably has always been the case, but definitely in the next 10, 15 years, is the things that are hard for machines to replicate are going to be a lot more valuable to you. So, creativity, communication, collaboration, critical thinking, those are the skills that you want to cultivate. And it's kind of a little bit of the complete opposite of the industrial workforce. The industrial workforce wanted you to behave machine-like. It needed you to have machine-like behaviors. It cultivated you from an education point of view to participate in a way that goes, you're filling the gap in machine capability. The problem is machines are machine better than people do now. So you need to have people better than machines. And I really want to shift that as what we're doing. And one of the reasons we're trying to get really early on cultivating that leadership potential is because the risks are so great, but the opportunities that we could capitalize on here are also incredibly massive, which I think is, a complete change of where we're at. And I suppose another question I have for you is how do you align that culture when we're talking about some of these shifts? What do you do to align that culture before launching an AI initiative to bring people into that fold?
Well, I think first of all, let's look at this. And you touched on a great point I really want to make, which is for many, many years, I have been throwing my arms up when I hear the term soft skills, because it was always
skills.
it's human skills, right? Let's be clear. When we're talking about communication, leadership, empathy, articulating points in a way these are human skills. They're not soft skills. They're not technical skills, but they're human skills. And the need for human skills, emotional agility, all the things that we're talking about as leadership behaviors that make a difference and matter dramatically to organizations' health, behavior, and success are going to be amplified dramatically by the introduction and proliferation of AI. So I think looking at aligning or I think having people understand that, number one, this is not intended to replace everyone's job. And number two, looking at the human-centric values, making sure that the AI solutions that are rolled out, they're anchored in human-centered values, in human skills. Because to your point, these are going to become much, much more valuable. So I've been teaching university for a number of years. And I always find it interesting when I ask students to present in front of the class. And if any of my students are watching this or see this, you know that's kind of day one, you're going to be in front of the class speaking. And there's this insular kind of aspect to what's going on in the world. And, we're all guilty of it. However, it always seemed most important to me that people are able to communicate effectively and to communicate verbally and communicate, in a way that's human. So that has become even more important. The trend in that is accelerating dramatically. I think looking at the small wins and the early adoption that you can roll out as an organization, and understanding that you're going to create these champions. And maybe there are work teams, and several organizations have different nomenclature they use. But having these champions within your organization to see, what are some opportunities we can to test this? And I think that's really where we are, is like, having a pilot program, having things to see what can we improve, what are the measurable, what can we measure? Because I think that's really the key, because any board, any leadership team is going to want to see measurable results. So no matter what the budget is, they're going to want to see measurable results. So we have an opportunity then to launch something that is a test, pick a department, pick an initiative, see how this can roll out, and really have the understanding of this is a proliferation that is going to happen in phases. And the human aspects are going to be absolutely critical to this. So I think, one of the things I think about from your perspective is what's the first steps in trying to make sure that if to the point I'm talking about launching an AI initiative, what are the first steps from your experience and opinion that help pilot this? Like getting an organization from zero, like off the ground. Like, what are your experiences with this or thoughts?
Definitely. It's a question that makes me think to the multitude of businesses that I've worked with, where we go, okay, well, we want to do something with AI, and they don't really know what it is that they want as an outcome to be able to be from it. So it's like all technology. First of all, you should be starting with the outcome, not the technology. And people try to work out their workflows and automations and everything like that before they've even decided what they want it to be able to do. So they go, should we use this program? Should we use that? Should we sign up with this organization? Should we get this kind of consultant? And I'm like, well, that's what workflows do you currently have? What are you doing? And there's a great a framework by Tim Ferriss, which is around, eliminate, automate, delegate. Okay. First of all, the biggest time that we spend is actually looking at eliminating all of those processes that have no value anyway. There's no point automating or utilizing AI on something that is a duff process to begin with. It doesn't bring value just because you've now got an AI doing it. So, and that elimination bin is always a lot bigger than our automation bin. And then from that aspect, I would go, great. Now we've decided that this is pointless. Some of the things that we were doing, they don't get measurable results. They don't really add value to the organization. Now let's go into a implementation aspect of thinking about, well, at the moment, let's take, for example, we want to be able to send a newsletter, and we don't do it because it takes too much time. And I go, okay, well, this is small fry, but let's go and work with it. So what are the component pieces? What's the trigger? Do you send your newsletter once a month? Do you send it once a week? Whatever it is, because we can build that into a workflow. And then what we start to do is look at how we build that workflow out and be able to go, well, these are the right tools to be able to do it. But people often want to know what AI can do rather than thinking, what do I need it to be able to do? And I think that it's really interesting seeing people's reactions to that, going, what do you want it to do? Because it's frozen. And a lot of the time they go, can't think of anything. Like you're telling me at the moment that all of the menial work that you're doing within your day-to-day job, there's nothing of that you would like to offload elsewhere in order to be able to focus on other priorities. And that really helps with the people starting to come on board to be able to go, oh, I see the value in this now. I see how this could be useful to me. But as I said, automating or utilizing AI on redundant processes does not all of a sudden make them good processes. And actually that detachment can take a little bit of time for people, because there's something precious over it. If we've been doing it for a while, we don't want to feel it devalued by an AI being able to get involved with it. There's a sense of identity around it. And I think this builds into a really big mindset shift as well. And that's the leadership responsibility here, is you are going to be cultivating a whole new way of thinking to participate in a digital workforce. And I suppose kind of leading on to your experience here, which is, leadership behaviors. How do you cultivate them to sustain this AI adoption in the long term?
Yeah.
What cultural behaviors do they need to have in order to be able to help their workforce?
It's interesting. You were mentioning the human side and the augmented side and the amplifying side, and we talked about what was falsely, in my opinion, called soft skills, which are human skills. But how can we, looking at the opportunity for leadership behavior to adapt? And first of all, you touched on this too. There's going to have to be a real embracing of imagination, because especially for well-worn paths. Let's be clear: if you're a senior most executive on the board or ex-com of an organization, you've probably been working for 20 or more years at larger companies. How can you step back, to your point, and let go of these sacred cows, even if they're not things you want, just that these are within my control, and say, I can offload these. And I think having understanding that there's going to be guardrails, right? This is not just pushing a button and let's just hang on for dear life. There's going to be guardrails, and having cross-functional accountability is really critical, because making sure that the team that's put together internally to help drive these initiatives has a clear outcome. And that's it sounds simple, but those are real challenges. Even now, for the work behaviorally that I'll do with clients, I always start with what is the outcome you're looking for from this? Whether it be a coaching opportunity or a large scale transformation, what is the outcome you're looking for? And if you're not clear on the outcome, you can't be clear at the onset. So as you consider these, thinking about the outcomes you're looking for is really absolutely critical. So I think having people understand at the senior most levels from a behavioral perspective that this is going to require a new way of thinking. It is not the same old, and it's not something you can just delegate and wash your hands of. I think part of the challenge from a leadership behavioral perspective is also embracing that these are new skills for a lot of leaders. These are new ways of working for a lot of leaders. And the interest in change, just from a human being perspective, is, none of us like to change too dramatically. So I think that having a mindset shift and say, well, how could this be done? To your point earlier, right? Thinking about ways that you haven't even considered the impact, thinking about processes that you have layered upon layered upon layered. Let's think about COVID, right? When we had the pandemic, what happened to me, and maybe this is unique, but I doubt it. We started to have more and more calls with clients, and the leadership teams were invited to these calls. And then for some clients, not everybody, we left a few people off as we kept going because they weren't obviously involved in decision making, and their roles were frankly unclear. And what COVID brought out, what the pandemic brought out, and what the virtual communication requirements at that point brought out was, what are they actually doing? What actually is their role? And I have to tell you, more than a dozen of my clients had a whole level that was really questioned. What was that level doing? Are they the level that just takes it from somebody else and hands it to that person over there? Was it necessary? Is there a better way of utilizing that person's skill sets? So now we have the same opportunity of looking at how are processes designed? What are their intention? Are they just legacy processes that just have been going? No one's really checked. It's just kind of going on autopilot for so long. And then really, what is the opportunity cost of that from an organization and from a leadership perspective? So leadership behavior has to weave into all of these processes. So I'll go back to you on this. What are the first steps? If I want to, as you talk to clients and as you look at this, what are the initial steps in upskilling and setting up, the pilots? What are your experiences with that, Jamie?
Sure, I'll go into that, but I also want to add on to your story about, being part of, is there a person that just passes from one bit to the other? And during the pandemic, well, just after the pandemic, I was talking to an organization, and they had someone whose job was literally to take the pieces of paper from one floor, take it up to the next one, get a signature on it, scan it, bring it back down, get the signature on the next floor, and then bring it up. And I was like, we could use technology to be able to do this. You've got digital signatures and everything that can be done here. And the guy was falling behind because he was just basically running up and down these floors of being able to sign this paper. And instead of going, yeah, we're going to implement the technology to be able to do it, this is how resistant people are to change. Is instead of getting the technology to do it, they hired a second person to go up and down the floors to be able to run this piece of paper up.
But I mean, also, like, we'll get to the questions, by the way. Yeah. Annalise and Tracy have asked questions. I think, I'm from the generation, and this is going to really bifurcate the audience right now. So before, in the olden times, before the internet and email and mobiles, we wrote memos. And I remember my first, initial by a memo was a big deal to me. And then I put it in an envelope that you may have never seen in your life. And those of you who know what I'm talking about or know what I'm going to say, there are these envelopes that have a list of everyone's name. They get delivered by inter-office mail. You read the memo. Initially, you read it, cross your name off, and it goes to the next person. And when we changed to email, there was a real resistance about this, about how are we going to know that Jamie read this if he doesn't sign it and cross off his name and send it to the next person. And it's quite hilarious when you think about it, because I can remember also, and we're at this inflection point, it was 1994, and there was a huge meeting at my company, and the topic was, I swear to you, if we're going to try this internet thing. And it was a multi-billion-dollar global enterprise. I will not mention the name, but it was if. And it was a really heated meeting with 50 people at the senior most levels. And what is this going to do? What's the ROI? No one knew. It was a totally unknown quantity, the internet back then. And now we have all this tech-enabled momentum ready to go. And that's the precipice that we're already crossed, frankly, in the AI age. And I think the opportunity that's there is dramatic. So anyway, go back to the question. So piloting this and starting off.
Because upskilling, it's a great point and a great aspect. And obviously there's a generational aspect of what we're talking about, which I think is really useful for the conversations around leadership, because this is happening at all levels. And that ties in nicely to the upskilling. Is we have various levels of participation in the workforce when it comes to digital. And one of the most important aspects of AI adoption for me is progress isn't progress if it only benefits the same people all of the time. So what do we need to do to bring everyone on board? And I think one of the most reassuring things that I would like people to take away from particularly utilizing generative AI is, if you have the capability to send an email, you have the capability to use generative AI. The whole point of the technology is it changes the interface to be more intuitive. So instead of you having to know how it works, the ins and outs of it, it should be getting more and more intuitive. And actually, if we want to talk really fast strategy, we can already take brain scans of somebody looking at an image, put that through generative AI, and create something that looks similar to the image that person's looking at. So essentially, at the moment, we have quite a lot of text to whatever interface. But as we keep developing this technology, if you can imagine it, you can create it. And that will be the aspect of it, which is why we talk about the human-centric skills. Because the whole point here is the technical capability to use generative AI shouldn't actually be the barrier to it. The better it gets, the more intuitive it gets, we can get on board with it. So when I'm looking at upskilling, it's really about looking at people understanding the technology, understanding that it isn't intelligence per se. It is a souped up predictive text calculator. It is essentially creating a statistically probable outcome based on the input that you give it. And we can utilize it in lots of different ways. And there is huge advantages. And we're always talking to people about, it might get you 80% of the way there really quickly, but the last 20% is always human oversight. And that's what we want to be able to cultivate when it's upskilling, is understanding what critical thinking you need in that 20% oversight in order to make sure that you're doing AI and AI is not doing you. Really nice callback to the title on that one.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I think that that's probably a really nice place to be able to stop. I know we've got a couple of questions. If anyone would like to also add in their questions, do feel free to do so. We'll take our time to be able to run through. But yeah, I just think before we go into that, just this has been really interesting, Jonscott. I've very much enjoyed it.
Yeah, it is. And for those of you watching, and this is something that Jamie and I kind of do, and part of the genesis of the Executive AI Institute was just we see this need, and it's the calls for it are louder and louder. So I'd like to jump in, and I'll ask you Tracy's question below. So how do you ensure AI systems are fair, transparent, and free of bias? I'll jump in after, but how do you?
Perfect.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, it's a great question, Tracy. And I want to highlight something I think is really important is that you can't ensure that these systems are fair, transparent, and free of bias. They are built on human data, and human data is inherently biased. And I can give you a really good example of this. Go into any generative AI platform, Anthropic, ChatGPT, doesn't matter what it is, and go, I want you to give me a list of the top 10 philosophers of the last 100 years. And I guarantee you that at least 8 out of 10 of those will be white men, middle class, westernized, because the data that ChatGPT or any other information has more information on those people. So when it's looking at producing a statistical probability, what it's going to do is it's more likely to give you those examples, because that's how the system works. There are things that we can do to help mitigate against it. We can't ensure that they're not there, but we can mitigate against it. And one really good example of being able to do that is just add the word, give us an inclusive list of, or give us a diverse list of philosophers of the last 100 years. And then you start to mitigate against some of the biases that are present in the data. Because essentially all of these systems just perpetuate societal norms and values. That's how they work. And there will be things that come out, and there will be organizations, and there will be projects that will look at how to start weighting our models differently. So at the moment, it does that because our data is biased, so we get better weights going in that way. But what we should be able to do is reweight these models and be able to go, actually, we want to be able to make sure that we are mitigating against that biased data. And this is something you can do organizationally as well. If you train up a model on your business, your organization, you're already changing the weights of that model, which means you're more likely getting the things that are going to be better towards you. So we can't ensure it because it's only statistically probable. And statistically probable means everything from gives you exactly what you want to completely rejecting. Like no is a completely viable option for any AI to be able to go, actually, I don't want to do that, because statistically it's a probable outcome. So we can do things to mitigate against it. And also this is where leadership understanding is really important. Do you want to go to Annelise's question?
Sure. I mean, it's observation, which I agree with Dr. Annelise. I think it does force us to be aware of what makes us human. I think this is what we mentioned a little while ago, which is it's amplifying our humanity because it's going to make those human skills. Again, I'm going to push for this change from soft skills. These human skills so much more critical because they're going to be more obvious as well. Because to your point, it actually weaves in an interesting way into Tracy's question, which is as you build these out, and I know Jamie and I, we've built some of our GPTs out because we're using them as part of our work, and we're training them on diversity and inclusive research. So that's something that we do by design. So to Tracy's question, if your enterprise is looking to roll out some type of AI enhancements, it's your responsibility and working with us, ours, to make sure that these are mitigated as much as possible. To Jamie's point, these are living, breathing, dynamic databases that are pulled from every minute of the day. So this is a growing momentum of change, and there's going to be some growing pains. There already are some growing pains. Let's be clear. The more you're involved in the world of AI now, the more you're aware of the growing pains that are presently underfoot. And the opportunity we have, even something really basic, if I ask, if I'm doing some work and I'll speak about, I posted something yesterday about my experiences with some of my doctors, and the responses I got back were biased towards the doctors being male every time. And I kept saying, please note the doctors are female. And so you building into this a bit more, and I think it's probably going to be an interesting tipping point back to the prioritization of human skills, right? To Jamie's point, we were trained, most of us in our education, to basically try to think in a very systematic and systematized machine way. And we've all been in those situations, particularly earlier in our careers, where the tasks we're doing are repetitive and not necessarily the most intellectually compelling, but they're foundational. And so how is this going to shift what makes us human at work and what makes us human in terms of our interface and leadership at organizations?
Definitely.
Go, Jim.
I'll hand you the question in a second. I just wanted to add on the back of that as well. For people that are looking to be able to understand, this idea of the data gap, particularly when it comes to a gendered aspect, I would highly recommend reading Invisible Women, Exposing the Data Bias, which is by Caroline Corrado-Partez, which really looks into why we have these data gaps to begin with. And I think this question follows on nicely from what you were just talking about. So in your experience so far, how would we be thinking of building leaders for success in an AI first world of business and work?
Thanks, Dr. Kumar. I think this goes into like the core of my work in leadership behavior and culture. So I think, in terms of building leaders for success, I think we're going into building leaders for humanity and for their human side. This shift is going to, in some ways, paradoxically, right? Because as we're getting more technical and more technically proficient, I think it's an interesting swing to realize that the real critical differentiators in the most technical aspects of artificial intelligence and enterprise operations are the human aspects of the leaders. So I think doubling down on making sure that leaders understand that their decisions have consequences and that their humanity and their ability to see the bigger picture of things and to really deduce and use their reasoning skills that are honed over experience with great experience, these are going to be incredibly valuable. So that may sound like an obtuse answer, but it is about as specific as I can get, because I think understanding that we're hiring people, these are not just cogs in a mix. I think it brings me back to, my early days and recruiting talent. And I had contemporaries and cohorts that colleagues who were looking to hire like a marketing undergraduate with a marketing MBA whose internships were, surprise, in marketing, to do a job at an organization and to come in as a marketing manager. And I'm like, all right, well, that's, pretty linear. But, what about this philosophy undergrad who did like a year abroad and started this company and exited at 22 and then went back to B school and has a degree in finance and then decided that they wanted to intern in a startup company in marketing, and then maybe they'll be an interesting person to bring into the marketing role. So think about the color, the colors that you bring in terms of the palette of experience that someone brings. Are they coming to you with, I'm thinking of like a Van Gogh holding like holding their colors in their hand? Is it just, all grays? Is it just all reds? Is it just, I'm thinking about the DISC assessments too. Are they just all yellows? Like, what are they? Is it a color montage? Do they have more tools available to them? So from an experiential perspective and from a human perspective, upskilling people, it sounds almost hilarious, upskilling people on their own humanity. How bizarre of a sentence is that, right? But the reality is these are going to be the critical differences. So is it an AI first world of business and work? It's moving there. I'm not sure if it's going to be AI first, but it's definitely going to be AI concurrent for the foreseeable future. Because I don't think that we're at a place, particularly from a leadership perspective and a behavior perspective for leaders, that we're going to abdicate decision making. Going back to Jamie's original point of saying, these are tools that can actually make decisions. However, as we look to do these things, I think it's important to understand that that is not a place that most organizations are going to be comfortable in a substantive way. I'm reading on, Dr. Kumar.
Yeah, I'll put the second part on it as well. So our second part says, I worry about the future where leaders are mixed teams of humans and bots thinking energetic or autonomous AI. Is this a realistic scenario? I want to follow on from what you're saying, and then I'll come back to it.
Yeah, go.
They're kind of in building those AI first worlds, but also, building those leaders. And I don't think it should ever be AI first. But one of the things that I do often think about leadership is the diversity of thought and the capabilities in there. And, diversity is about counting people, but inclusion is about making sure that people count. And what we want to be able to do is make sure that you recognize that there is a diversity of human experiences and abilities, and actually all of them have value. It's not about fitting that robot framework anymore, that education system that, you know, turn people into to that kind of off the shelf kind of person. What we want to be able to do is look at the diversity of talent that maybe wasn't seen in your organization before. I always think to Ken Robinson, and he goes, the late Ken Robinson, late great, I should say. But the human communities depend on a diversity of talent, not a singular conception of ability. The heart of that challenge is to reconstitute our sense of ability and intelligence. I always think that when we're looking at artificial intelligence, we're talking about a very narrow framework of intelligence, if we were even to go along that line. And actually, what we really want to be able to see is that cultivation of that diversity of different ways of thinking and different ways of solving that ability and different types of intelligence. Those human-centric skills are different types of intelligence that people bring to the table. So am I worried about a future where there's teams and robots and you know, there's a combination between the two of it? I think that there's a degree of inevitability of it, but I don't think that it means that people are diluted within that space. I would like to think that we can reconstitute what it means to be a human being in the workplace, and to make sure that people are doing the things that are leveraging what human beings uniquely bring to the table, not what robots can do. So that's kind of my perspective, but I'll hand over to you for that bit and we'll make this our last point.
Yeah. So, Dr. Kumar, send me a DM. This is a fun conversation. I'd like to continue. It brings me back to, again, I hate to go backwards to go forward, but I think it's sometimes inevitable. It goes me back to like toll collectors back in the day. And, you know, these were people literally taking, you know, cash or coin for us. And then I remember when it went to like baskets and we were throwing coins in, and now we don't stop because everything is scanned electronically. So this is an evolution that took place over several steps. The opportunity, and I'm curious about the worry about it, because I understand the concern for sure, but these are happening now. In many ways, if you were to ask someone 20 years ago what's going on, and see now what's happening, these are happening now, where there's shared groups of accountability and technical skills and execution. And I think it's really interesting to look at how that's operated on a day-by-day basis for organizations. It's going on. And I think we go back to the one simple point I'd like to bring up. You know, I look at 7 overall pillars with my clients for the last, 20 or so years. And they are positivity, authenticity, courage, action, joy, gratitude, and resilience. At the core of those, in the center of that, is courage and action. So we are at a major inflection point for leaders and organizations, and this will be my summary point for this, where having the courage to think differently and taking action to implement that courageous vision is really where we're at right now. All the other 5 are very critical. Obviously, I think they are. But the middle 2, courage and action, are really foundational to what's going to happen in the near term and the future success of yourself and your organization.
Yeah.
How about your final points?
My final point kind of just builds on the back of that, really, which is, you know, if you're looking for examples of people that have done this before, then you're already in the wrong bit, because you can't have that safe bit of people that have done this before and we want to do something completely new and out there and change the world and change the way of doing things. And I think that that's the opportunity for any business, any organization, any way of showing up within the space and time that we're living in, is the opportunity to reinvent it for the better, do something differently, not off the cuff of what you've constantly seen, because there is, if you can do it, somebody else can do it and they can replicate it just like that. So let's create and cultivate the values that we want to see. Even when we talk about the AI aspects, you know, how do we cultivate these language models with the values that we want it to perpetuate? How do we make sure that what it is, that reflection of AI, is just a mirror of us? So how do we want to change our reflection to be something that's more aspirational of where we want to be? So I hope that that's kind of where we're leading to. Jonscott, this has been a fantastic conversation. I want to thank everyone for their comments and questions as well. But yeah, if you want to kind of wrap up a little bit with about us, and then we'll close the stream.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's you bring up some. This has been a really entertaining and enjoyable, as always, Jamie. And hopefully for those of you listening and watching, this has sparked questions. And I think that's really our intention at the beginning of this. As I say, it's always good to start with the intended outcome. I want you to go away from this and be curious, like, wait, is that an opportunity, or am I behaving in this way, or is that something I can do, or I'm afraid of this change because it's going to mean this cascading level of changes for my organization. So all of these questions, let's talk truly, because as you can hopefully tell, Jamie and I are very passionate about this. And I think the opportunity that you all have listening and watching this, whenever you're listening and watching this, is that today is day one, for you. So action now is much more critical than waiting for it to be an ideal solution, packaged ideally, that's going to come off the shelf, that's going to transform your operation. It's just not going to be that way. So the ability you have right now is to take action and ask a question and pursue the knowledge. We're happy to be part of that pursuit solution for you. And just on a personal level, like I mentioned to Dr. Kumar earlier, send an instant message or a message to us. And we're happy to have the conversation and dialogue continue. But ask questions and be curious. It's really important.
Love it. Thank you so much. And we've got lots of positive feedback coming through. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll catch you. This is, as we said, day one, but we'll have more of these webcasts coming up. So hopefully we'll catch you all at the next one, and have a wonderful day, and speak to you all very, very soon.
Bye, everybody.